Hey everyone, Ekman here with another video, and we're about a month away from the 2024 to 2025 season finals of the One Piece card game at the Card Fest in Japan, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be in attendance in person watching from the stands, and I was there last year. It was a lot of fun, and also like last year, there is going to be a big restriction list just announced at the end of day 2. There is one that we'll look at again at that happened at the end of last year, and this is something leading up to this. I'm like, are they going to do it again? You know, at the end of the season, are they going to make some new restrictions? And before I made a video going over it, they ended up making the announcement that it was going to happen. So we're going to go over my thoughts based on data, based on stats. I've been looking more into the OP10 and EB02 meta in general too, and just kind of my thoughts going on into it as well. So I will say real quick, this is an opinion piece. Most of my videos are more kind of data driven, and this one is still data driven as well, but more kind of personal biased and opinions based on the data in my own sense. So my opinion and your opinion can be completely different. All I ask is just to be respectful in the comment section, but you know, this is not necessarily a call to action from Bandai, even though we know some action is going to be taken at this point, nor just complaining, but just my perspective in the first place. So I hope you guys appreciate that, and just be civil about it. I know there's a lot of opinions, and I'm not saying that mine is the right one, just based on what I've been seeing as well. So I also want to say that I've been seeing a lot of people kind of counter say, oh, I don't think a restriction needs to happen. Why are we getting a restriction list? And this is not necessarily a bad thing or a thing that I disagree with either. We did have a big restriction list that happened again last year at Card Fest, and again, I was going to make a video seeing if we, even discussing if there was going to be one, but their announcement beat me to it. But I also want to say, like, I don't personally believe in restrictions just for restriction's sake. I feel like there has to be a meaning for it, and I think that there has to be they don't know if you just ban cards so old leaders can't compete, so you have to play new games, new cards. I don't think that's really organic in that way. And I made a restriction list prediction video for going into the OP09's section or meta for us, and my conclusion was that there wasn't going to be a restriction list, which ended up being right. But if you watch that, I'm just saying, I say I don't, there are a couple overtuned things at times, but I don't think that anything's going to get hit, and I think that's a valid opinion in its own right for nothing to be hit in the first place. But my bias, though, is that I do think if there's a deck that's just been very prevalent for a long time, and I'm also biased because I input a lot of these deck lists by hand, so like I've input like over 100 Doflamingo lists, or 100 black and yellow Luffy lists, and like, man, these are exactly the same. Like they're like 48, 49 cards the same. It slowly drives me mad when I just see the same list over and over. But that's my bias, right? Just because a deck is popular and good doesn't mean that it necessarily needs to be hit. Though, if there's a case where it's been the same build or the same card pool, like we'll talk about in a little bit, then it hasn't really changed as the meta has developed. It's still been like very good. I do think that's when I think some action has to be taken, because the organic way of like introducing new decks doesn't seem to be working to remove it or like even make things like at the same level of it. So that's my thoughts for it. So this is my approximate like Japan and Asia OP10 EB02 tier list for their current meta. I've been doing a lot of like individual deck list inputs on my website too, Eggman Events, which you guys can check out. So I'm a little bit like on the know for what this meta looks like, since I've been doing, I've gone through over 100 deck lists at this point for what their meta looks like right now. And based on my own opinions and what I've been seeing, this is kind of where I'm thinking. It's a little oversimplified, but in general, I think the best decks in the format are Blue Doflamingo and the new Green and Purple Luffy. The Green and Purple Luffy is pretty new. It still has time to get better and or worse, or people to adapt to it, but I do think it's very strong. Underneath there's pretty much, Teach and decks that can use Gecko Moria, I think, overall. Smoker's kind of like an afterthought, but definitely Teach, Rob Lucci, and I think Black Yo Luffy to some regards are very meta. I think it's from left to right, it's kind of tiered, and then the rest, these decks aren't bad, and I think that they do have some good chances. And the green and red Smoker ended up winning the Asia finals that happened this past weekend, so clearly that deck is very viable. But I don't know if it's necessarily on the same level as some of these other decks either. So that's just my opinion. This is what I've been seeing right now, but EB02 came out a couple weeks ago. It's still a new meta in Japan, so there could be just changes that develop overall, but I don't think anyone will disagree that Blue Doflamingo and Green Purple Luffy are very strong and probably contenders for the best decks in the format right now in Asia. So that's kind of my thoughts for it. So going based off that premise and what I've seen, I think it's very likely, like I'd be very surprised if nothing from Doflamingo got hit. And mostly because it's been the best deck in OPO 8.5 onwards, right? We've had 9, we've had 10, we've had EB02, and not only is the deck very good, very popular from North America itself, it's been the most popular leader for every event since OPO, since the new Star decks came out, and it's won a lot of events too. But the other issue is that it's still doing well in Japan. People aren't changing their deck list. There's nothing from OP09 onward that people are adding to Doflamingo. It's just the same pile of cards that just continues to win without a lot of interaction in my mind. So because of that, I think something needs to change, because clearly introducing new decks into the format don't seem to interact with what Doflamingo wants to do. You can hard counter it, but it's really difficult to hard counter Doflamingo and then still, I think, have a good matchup spread across the rest of the field very easily. So from likely to unlikely, I think that Jinbei is probably the most likely hit, just because it's a card that lets you play another card from your hand for free. And I think, Jinbei and Trafalgar Law is a really strong combo. Even for like 5 Dawn, though, like if you play a 1-drop Sengoku to find one of these two, Jinbei Law, and then you Law back the Sengoku, and then you get rid of a 4 cost, like that's just so much momentum, that's so much power that a lot of decks are just like cannot keep up with in its own way. So not only like the added consistency from like the Doflamingo leader, from being able to play things from the top of our deck, the additional cycling we get, and like top deck manipulation, all of that kind of continues in itself. You guys know that Dofi's good, right? Do I have to explain how good Dofi is to you guys? I really don't think I do, right? So I don't know what the best hit though is. I think Jinbei's the clearest option for it. I also think like they might not like hitting super rares. They really haven't done it previously, or if they do, they restrict it to 1. They don't generally ban super rares outright. The leader Doflamingo itself, it's a set 1 leader, right? It could be something that when it was made, it was just okay, but as we get more and more cards in the 4-drop Warlord card pool, like it's just getting better, right? Like the fact that this leader exists, there's just so many tools that it can take advantage of. I do think it could maybe have the situation where like Sakazuki and Trafalgar Law have seen, where they ban the leader and then they make a reprint promo that's strictly worse, but maybe viable in the future. 4-drop Law, this card is dumb. I don't know what to say. It's just really dumb in its own way. Obviously, we have like Jozu as well, right? Jozu's been very good, but the fact that you can bounce 2 of your own cards back to your hand is you just get so much cycle, so much advantage. And even if it's just like a 1-drop to get another 4-drop back to your opponent's hand, this card is clearly very good in what it does. So I know that Boa Hancock, which is like the second best Warlords leader, loves to play this card, and it would be strictly worse without it, but that could also be hit. I could definitely see it being under scrutiny. And then I haven't seen this for a while. I've known some people say like 4-drop Boa is very strong, and I won't deny it. I think it's likely just gonna I don't think anything's gonna happen to it, but I know that if to kind of add a 4th card to this line, I think Boa Hancock is maybe deserving of it. I don't know. This is not a card that I'm currently complaining about, but I know some people have complained about it in the past, just being a 4-drop 6k, which is really a 3-drop 6k if you really want to think about it, and being able to play this card for free off your leader, or for cheap off your leader, puts you into a lot of good situations too. So I don't know. I think this is my prediction for it, but I would be, again, incredibly surprised if Doflamingo doesn't get hit at all. And I think a lot of people are kind of in that boat as well. So, and again, this is a deck that I think personally should be hit just because it's been unchanged for so long. They've tried introducing so many decks to try to counter it or compete with it, and I don't think really anything is stuck so far. So that's it. Next up, we've got EB02 Monkey D. Luffy. This is probably the most volatile leader in the sense that it just came out a couple weeks ago, and it's something that Bandai, in most card games, unless they're really forced into, they don't want to hit a card that they released within the last couple weeks, right? Like if you have to hit a card you just released, it's a really bad look in a lot of ways. So generally speaking, I don't know if there's going to change anything with this deck, even though it has been very present as itself. But the other thing is that like purple Straw Hats, or purple Luffy specifically, has been a really good archetype for the last 6 months or so, in the fact that, you know, we got a lot of good cards from the introduction of the purple Luffy starter deck again from the end of OP08. OP09 had like a lot of generic good purple cards as well, which is really strong. And then we just keep getting more good Straw Hat cards, which shouldn't be surprising, right? It's the main archetype for the show. But I do think it's to a point and kind of reached an event horizon where you're like, man, all the generically good cards are also Straw Hats. There's a lot of consistency for it. And does that mean we have to change how we approach this deck? So generally speaking, I think the most busted card in the deck is Gum Gum Giant. If they're going to hit something from it at this point right now, I think it's probably the most likely card. It did just come out in OP09, but this card just doesn't really have a downside, right? The fact that you're able to draw, trash a card in cycle. So I don't know. I don't know even where to begin, honestly. Like, this card is just so good, right? It's cracked in the sense that if you're at 10 Dawn, this has like no cost. Like, the Dawn -2 doesn't matter. Even if it does, being able to get out of attack without losing any hand advantage is really good. And really just makes it so your opponent doesn't even want to like attack like anything, like 7Ks, right? If you go 7K into a 5K, that's pretty rough. But also this green and purple Luffy becomes a 6K by its own volition, right? You do have to do like the Dawn -2, but when you have cards in the archetype and in the deck that let you get Dawn back, it doesn't even matter that much. So I don't know. I think that Gum Gum Giant is incredibly strong. It's a card that has been getting a lot of value. And we also have another purple Luffy coming out in OP11 that is also naturally a 6K. And I think Giant would be a really busted card in that deck too. So I don't know if they're going to do anything about it, but that's been what I've been noticing, is that this leader has really kind of taken like purple Luffy to another level, and it might be a time where like Gum Gum Giant just is too strong of a card as it is. So there it is. All right, Gecko Moria and kind of black as an archetype in general. So I would be pretty surprised at this point if Moria escapes the restriction list once again. This card came out in OP06, which came out about a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago. Likely since then, I've seen at least one person tell me that they think Gecko Moria is busted and needs to get banned. So I've heard it over 300 times if it's just once a day for the last 300 days, right? Like, this is probably the most contentious card that we've seen in this game that has not gotten hit, right? And then they got reprinted in the PR set, right? Which means that, it likely wasn't going to get hit in OP09, which it didn't. And it's a card that I think just gets a lot of value as time gets on. We've seen it with Rebecca, especially getting that, value, right? We've seen Rob Lucci pretty much break this card. The fact that you get to play like 4 bodies and remove like 1 or 2 of your opponents is super good, especially when it's on an 8-drop 9K body. So if it survives, I'd be pretty surprised at this point. This has probably been the most complained about card in this game, at least in the last year, continuously. And I think as soon as recently as OP06, when it came out, people were like, this card is busted, it needs to go away. And it's lasted this long. So if it continues to be at 4 copies, untouched, uneroded, anything, I would be personally very surprised, and we'll have to see what happens from there. One tier underneath that, we've got Ice Age and Tempest Kick. This deck has been, or like cost reduction has been pretty good, right? In general, when we look at the restriction list that we've seen already, 2 cards have been hit in this game because they reduced the cost of things. We've got Great Eruption, which they banned, and then they printed Tempest Kick, which was arguably a better version of Great Eruption, especially in Rob Lucci, since you were able to search it because it was a cipher pull card. And then Ice Age, which when it came out was pretty trash. It was not run, kind of like Great Eruption. But once we got more cards that were able to interact with these cards, these 1-drop events that were able to get things into range of your good removal cards made all the difference, right? You don't mind going -1 in hand if you're able to get the Temple of Establishing a body and removing a threat on your opponent's board, especially if they had like a relevant 1 attacking effect kind of thing. So in general, like cost reduction is something I think they have to really keep an eye out for. I don't know if they're going to hit these at all, but if they do, it's likely one or two, right? I think in general, I think someone said, hey, we can't have Tempest Kick and Great Eruption be around at the same time for very long, right? Like that's just like too good of a thing. Like if I remember correctly, Japan had it for like 3 weeks or so when both cards were legal, and it was just crazy, right? Like being able to just like not like get something like continuous reduction without losing your hand size is really, really, really good. So the fact that, you know, Tempest Kick exists, Ice Age still exists, every Rob Lucci list that I've seen since OP07 runs both at 4. Like they are just such staple cards that I think to a point, I don't think both these can exist at the same time, at least at 4 copies. So they could be restricted to one, they could get banned, but I think it's moderately likely that something happens with one of these 2 cards. And then Black Yellow Luffy, we've got another slide we're going to look at in a minute, but I do think that the deck could get hit. If Moria gets hit, like I think the leader is just fine. I don't think the leader needs to be touched outside of that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And then Rebecca, for a long time, I know people were arguing about Rebecca. Rebecca can also be something that is leader locked. I don't think they're going to ban the card, especially since we get Usopp in OP10, which is a Dressrosa card, which there's not a lot of synergy with Rebecca and Usopp in general, so I don't think that's even much of a thing, but most people, I think, are saying that Moria is the stronger card, or at least these cards can't exist at the same time, is the kind of the overarching idea in my mind too. So I've talked about this before. Bandai has done this thing called choice restriction in the past for their other card games, where they say these 2 cards can't be played in the same deck, and so that could happen again for Rebecca and Moria. I would put that underneath the something happens to Moria restriction, so I'd count that as a win, a point in the Eggman bucket. But I do think that it's something that's possible if they decide that, yeah, guess what, an 8-drop that plays a 4-drop that plays a 3-drop, also probably pretty not good for our format, especially because the cards you play are from trash, so you don't even have to lose cards in hand either. So we'll see if that happens or not. So Star Deck 13 Luffy's been, I think, one of the more contentious leaders in this game, strictly because when you really get to it, you can't really interact with it. It's pretty polarizing for its matchup. It does have a couple rough ones like Bonnie in the past, but it just kind of plays its own game. It doesn't even really play the One Piece card game, right? It plays the Star Deck 13 Luffy card game in its own way. You just end to the spot where you just rotate through your Sabos and Luffys. You play Gecko Morias. You just say, I can't lose for 3 turns, no matter what you do, and then you eventually win, right? That's generally how this deck works. It does not play One Piece. It plays its own game in its own way, which isn't necessarily bad, but when it's been playing its game since OP07, 6+ months from now, and it's been generally the same. There have been minor techs that have been kind of discovered. Star Deck 14, has some cards that people are using, like the Nami. I won't say it's been a completely static deck list, but it has been generally the same, and at least the game that it's playing, right? The game that the end game is always the same. Play as many Gecko Morias as I can, cycle through my Sabos, which are very hard for some decks to interact with, and as a 9k leader with 1 life, and then I just can't lose. And then either you try to just get cards out of my hand, and you do, but nothing happens, or you just kind of like establish a board and no pressure happens towards me. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with it. I do think that it has been getting slowly worse, though. I think Teach is a pretty bad matchup for this deck. Not unwinnable, but definitely not a matchup that it wants to see. And additionally, I don't know. If Moria gets hit, right, I think that's fine. I think that's enough for this Luffy to not get affected. If there's like the choice restriction between Moria and Rebecca, generally people don't play those 2 cards at the same time with Luffy, so that's something different. I wouldn't be surprised if the leader itself got banned, but I don't really know if that's going to happen. It's just really up in the air in its own way. So I wouldn't be surprised if it does, it technically escapes getting hit in its own way. But it's also a deck that I'd be super fine never playing against again. So that's my own bias for it. I will say that playing the deck, you have a lot of fun, and there's like a lot of kind of resource management, and getting like the combo set up is can be really fun, and also very skill intensive in its own way. But playing against it feels pretty bad in a lot of senses too. So I don't know if anything's going to happen to it. This is the one that I'm probably more up in the air with in general, but I think that likely something's going to happen. Whether the leader itself or the Moria getting hit will affect how this deck performs moving forward. So there it is. And then Martial Teach. This is kind of a weird one. This is just kind of my afterthoughts with it. Right now in the English OP09 meta, at least in North America, we have been looking at events outside of North America too, but Teach has not been super relevant, right? I would say that it makes up of a top cut percentage, generally somewhere around 10 to 15%. Some events it hasn't even topped, and I think, in my personal opinion, the reason for that is that Doflamingo is such a strong deck. It's so present, and it's pretty clearly one of, if not the worst matchup for Martial Teach. The fact that you don't really rely on your on plays that often, the fact that you're able to play out a lot of bodies pretty quickly, and it just means that Teach has a hard time stabilizing in that matchup. It's not impossible, but it's something that's very tough, and I think you kind of have to rely on like some good triggers out of life just to be able to kind of balance out the tempo of how good the Dofi leader effect is against this deck. So I think that's something that has held it back. It does get some new support in OP10, including this Kuzan, which I know a lot of people are like, why did they make this card? This card is awfully good for this deck, for a deck that didn't necessarily need it. And there's just like a lot of, you know, this lets you just kind of go into anything you need in a lot of situations, which is really, really strong. So I don't know if we need to hit anything. It's going to be tricky because it's an OP10 card, so I doubt they're going to hit an OP10 super rare on frame 1 on release, and so I really don't know, but I do think like if Teach doesn't get hit, there's a chance that it is the best deck in the format. It's something that I think they have to be really cognizant about, and my personal bias as well. Sometimes it's pretty lame to play against Teach, and that doesn't mean that you should be doing the format meta or like restrictions based on if it's lame or not. But I know a lot of people just don't like playing against the leader because once it's able to set up, you just don't have a game anymore. You just slowly lose over a couple turns. So I don't know. I know some people find that exciting, and that's fine, and I'm not trying to take that away from anyone. But from a customer satisfaction side, which I think does get impacted when they do restriction list, I think that some people would be pretty upset if this was the best deck in the format, if there wasn't a lot of ways to do it. So I do think that they are getting better at using more activate main effects when they're printing cards more recently, and less of like on play effects, which obviously this deck diminishes with its activate main. But I'd be curious to see. I don't know. This is probably up in the air a little bit. I don't think they're going to hit anything directly out of Martial Teach, but it's something that it has probably the most to gain depending on what happens to its worst matchups as well. So lastly, unrestricting cards. I know a lot of people are talking about this too. Personally, I don't think they're going to unrestrict anything in general. If I was to say if one card was to come back, it would probably be Moby Dick. I know a lot of people asking for this. I'm not campaigning for this at all right now, so I better not see on Twitter people saying, "Oh, Eggman says Moby Dick should come back." I don't really believe that in general, but it could, right? It's something. We do have some more of the Whitebeard Pirates leaders, like Marco could use it, I suppose, but it's what it is. And then in its lobby, like if we lose like Ice Age and like Tempest kick, maybe like having like a stage like this, I think is fine. Like if they want to try to make it so like, especially since one, it doesn't have the cipher pole tag, it's a world government, so it's not searchable. The trigger off of life can be like a little bit nasty, especially like Moby Dick's the same way because it is a trigger off life as well. But I don't know how I feel about unrestricted. I'd rather them just kind of make new cards in their own way and just kind of go from there. But I don't know, nothing in my own. If you think something should be unrestricted, go for it. But personally, I don't think it's going to happen either. So, all right. And one more thing before we end with our final restriction prediction. This is kind of tangential, but I do think it kind of wraps up into the discussion of restriction list. And it's with this additional announcement that we're getting with One Piece Day, which is happening in Dallas the weekend before Cardfest. I'll also be in attendance for this event, so I'm going to be traveling a lot in March. But we're going to have Shun there, and he has an exciting announcement for us for the One Piece card game, specifically since he's the English version producer as well. So what a lot of people are speculating, and what I would say is pretty possible in my own opinion, is that they're going to announce the synchronization for the One Piece card game. For the majority of Bandai card games that exist right now, since I try to cover as much as I can across them, most of them are global releases at this point. We do have like Fusion World, which came out last year, which was, synchronized on release. We have Gundam coming out later this year, which is going to be a global release as well. We have Digimon, which is just wrapping up their synchronization in the next couple weeks too, so that will be a global format. And so and then Masters is just only played in English. There's no Japanese card game for it, and it's different than Fusion World. I have to say that every time. And then Battle Spirit Saga is getting canceled at the end of March, and it's always been different than what Japan knows as Battle Spirits, which has been going on for 20 plus years at this point. So and then Union Arena, it's a whole different bag of worms. We're not going to talk about it, but generally speaking, it's not unheard of that the next push for one of their biggest card games is to push it for a synchronization across the English and Japanese versions of it. So if that happens, I'm definitely a pro for it. I do think that there have been some interesting times in the past, including this year with the two restriction lists that we've gotten, where knowing that the cards are banned before are broken before we get them, in our format, does make it that they can make some decisions to make the format a little bit better for us. They've kind of experimented with it. They did, I think, a little bit more experimentation the first year with like the Newgate ban and like the Nami ban in November of 2023. But in general speaking, it's just always been tied with it. So if we have like this global format and we have these restriction lists happening around the world at the same time, I think that'd be pretty cool. I love being able to discover, new decks and be part of the discovery process of what new leaders and what decks look like in new formats. So I think that's really cool. I think there is like a minor con for this where there are times where like they make a format and if it's not balanced correctly, we're all experiencing something that's a little bit worse. So I think it's going to be higher highs and lower lows in its ways, but that's something that I'm particularly fine with and what I want to do. And I'm just happy we had to have OP06 Sakazuki for like an additional 3 months, even though like Japan went through all of their OP06 format with Sakazuki being legal. I don't know, there's just been this weird thing, like whenever English cards come out, whenever I open packs, I know what decks look like 48 out of 50 cards most of the time, right? It just means like where's the discovery in deck building, and I know what decks are good and what the deck builds look like. And so when there's a tier 0 deck, which I will argue the Sakazuki was an OP06, which I think Bandai agrees with because they banned it, but it stinks when the card was banned in March globally, except for it was announced globally it was getting banned in March, and Japan had it banned in March, but we had to wait until June for us to hit it. And then kind of conversely, Red Purple Law was super broken in Japan's OP08 format, and because of that, they restricted it on the release of OP08 for us, which I think was really good for us because Law was unironically like 50% of the meta, if not more, from like a topping percentage. And generally Japan and the Japanese format and Asia format, they tend to be more conservative with their leaders in the sense that they try to experiment with new stuff. North Americans like to just take the best deck and make it as good as possible, and just really over-tune it. So I think it would have been even worse for us here in North America, and it would have been quite a slog of a format if it was around. So I think that's like the only negative, that if there's a format that's bad, it's going to be doubly bad because more people are going to be playing it at the same time. But I think that's worth the risk of synchronization, and I hope that's the announcement. We'll see what happens, but I'll be interested to see what it is regardless. So kind of ending this video though, this is my final restriction prediction. I think something from Doflamingo is going to get hit. I really don't know what it is. I think Jinbei is probably like an easy choice, and then leader is kind of like a heavy choice, but I think that it's also like a set one leader, that if they have to keep kind of building around what this leader can do, it's something that they have to probably address. And obviously it's a leader that started out pretty mediocre, and when they made more and more cards you could play off its leader effect, it just got exponentially better. I think Moria is going to get hit in some way, whether it's being banned, whether it's being limited, whether it's restricted as a leader with an errata, whether it's you can't play with Rebecca. Something's going to happen with it. I think something's at this point. I feel like people have been complaining about this card for too long and for too loud that there's no way that it escapes it, but we'll have to see. And then lastly, on the maybe limit or ban, I'm going to say Tempest Kick, Ice Age, and Gum Gum Giant. I think these are all great candidates for cards to be limited to one, to be honest. They're pretty generically strong effects. I think like these like one of event cards that kind of skew some matchups and sometimes helps you a lot. And, you know, obviously if there's no cost reduction in the meta, there's going to be, you know, it's going to turn off all your removal cards at the same time. But I think something's likely going to happen with these, so we'll see if that's true or not. Probably, if anything, I think Gum Gum Giant's probably the highest likelihood for it, but I think it's likely one of these three are going to get hit in one way or the other. So that's going to be it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's just me talking for a long time, but I have a lot of opinions on this. I'd go through a lot of data. And I see a lot of deck lists. I see a whole lot of deck lists. And so whenever one deck is just present and it's the same 45 plus cards out of 50, I definitely start to notice it. And it becomes pretty clear to me when one deck is doing way better and is more present than others. And if that needs to be changed or not, I think it's up to Bandai and your own opinions too. So again, I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you guys think about this and your own opinions on it too. And I'd be curious to see what you guys think is going to happen with this restriction. So that's going to be it for me. Thank you for watching. Catch you all next time.